I'm going to give a high-level overview of what we're going to go through today, and I'm just going to go here and do it on the screen. So there's a couple of different components that we have. Thanks. The couple of components that we have. There's going to be 2 GitHub repos that we're going to take a visit. One's going to be a tutorial, and the other one's going to be the open source release we had the other day. And there's a few components here that we had asked you to download, but there's some problems with. The first one is Kettle itself. So everything that we use on our open source release is using Kettle. So we take Kettle, we set it up with a few environmental variables that we only need to adjust once. Right? We only will need to adjust that once. And then there's settings, and there's only 3 or 4 settings for every single ETL you write from that point forward to be able to do that. Now today's tutorial is going to really take a look at if you have Socrata as an endpoint. Right, so if you're going to load that data into Socrata. However, the framework that we have is easily modifiable that you can set it up with any API endpoint. So if you're DCAN or CCAN, you just need to make the appropriate modifications, and things for the most part will work from there. And again, the purpose is set your environment up once and make minimal modifications that you need for any subsequent ETL. Okay, so the first bit here is the Open Data ETL Utility Kit. And the address is up here, github.com/chicago/open-data-etl-utility-kit. And you see a few different files here. What's also helpful that you might like to go, and we have it up here in the URL, is the documentation is available on Read the Docs, which is a great utility if you haven't used it. You use this Python documentation. You can generate some nicely formatted documentation. So this describes how to get everything set up. So if you want to go and you set this up for yourself, go to Read the Docs here, and it has full documentation. The first page here just talks about the features. And again, the thing that we're trying to achieve here is fourfold. One, it's open source at the core. Everything you can do with open source tools. It's compatible with multiple data sources, so this isn't something that's only going to be compatible with an Oracle database or something dumb like that. And it's also, and this is the bit I like the most, it's compatible with multiple operating systems. The workflow that we have set up deals with little variations between the operating system. We check what operating system you're on. And so certain file paths are written one way for one operating system, other ways for other operating systems. We account for that. If we actually do our development, on a Windows box, and we deploy our production ETLs on a headless Linux server. Right? There's not even a GUI on the thing. And we just throw the files over there, set our cron jobs, and then we run it. And then finally, we have some helpful utilities that help you analyze how your ETL process has been running so far. So the requirements are Kettle, Java 1.6 or higher, although DataSync, I know you guys like 1.7, but it works for 1.6. And then DataSync itself, this is a Socrata-specific thing, but pertinent here for today, where we use DataSync to be able to do some of our heavy lifting. So it has table of contents here. The first bit I'm going to go into is the installation configuration. So the installation configuration of Pentaho itself. It's pretty straightforward. Tomorrow, when the file downloads, you'll be able to you'll have the zip file that's huh?
Do most people have it now?
Really?
Okay, if you don't, I've got it.
Mostly have it? All right. What are we on time? We might be a little bit crunched on that.
We're 20 minutes in.
All right. OK, so if you have it, then let's follow through. But I'm going to move pretty quick, and I won't do the check to make sure everybody's up to date on it, because we're going to be a tight tutorial anyway. OK, so the one way that we get this going is just using Git. So I'm going to use Git as well. If you don't have Git, there's a number of other ways of doing it. So one of the things that you need to do is to install the Etl framework somewhere. I use it with this. That should be a better background to read. So figure out where you're at. But one of the things that you're going to want to do is this Etl framework you're going to download, almost everything is going to go into it. So really be sure about that location. You can modify it and you can send it somewhere else later, but that's going to make you go back and reconfigure certain bits. But for the most part, we use relative paths, so it doesn't create too much heartburn if you change it down the road. But you want to find a place that you're relatively okay of keeping all your ETLs in the meantime. So in this case, I put mine under Documents and under Git. So if you've never done it before, one way that you pull it, so I have mine under Documents and Git. You go to the repository. If you've not had this before, you can copy and paste the repository, and you run git clone right there. And you run git clone, and you put it into the directory you have. And the way that I've always described it in the documentation is path to directory. So my path to directory is my home directory / documents / git. Right? And if you're on a Windows machine, and certainly it is Windows compatible, it might be something like C : users, your username, / documents, whatever it might be. The documentation I have up right now is Mac OS Linux, but there is also documentation for Windows if you want that as well. It's almost the same, it's just the difference in file paths. The next step you want to do, after you run the git clone, and I'm going to go into the directory here so you can see what downloads. So after you clone that down, the next thing you want to do is to install and put Kettle somewhere where you want to keep that. This is a bit of a nuanced thing. We make a couple of recommendations here. So the version of Kettle that you download, it's going to open up a file called data integration. So when you unzip Kettle from PDI blah, 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 4.4.0 stable, what I would recommend is you put the version number behind it. Right? So you go data-integration 4.4.0. The reason I recommend this is it's going to make upgrading down the road easier. So if you ever want to go to Kettle 5.0, what you'll do is you'll put Kettle 5.0 in its own directory. You'll put Kettle 5.0 into its own directory. You don't want to immediately overwrite that because obviously what you're going to want to do with your ETL process is test it. You're going to want to test to make sure that Kettle 5.0 doesn't break things. And in this case, Kettle 5.0 breaks a lot of things. It's a pretty big bump in its code base. And so what we also recommend is as soon as you download it and you have data integration -XYZ, you create a symlink between a folder data-integration and whatever version you currently want to point to for production. So if you test data integration 5.0 and you say, OK, this works, the way that you upgrade your production environment is you just readjust the link from data integration going to 4.4.0 to data integration 5.0. And then all of your ETLs will adjust and start talking to Kettle 5.0 instead of 4.4. So if you have 100 ETLs, you don't need to modify every single script. You just modify a symlink down the road, and you save yourself a lot of time when it comes to upgrades. So that's a suggestion that we make. And I have it here. For me, I put it into the applications directory. I put it into the applications directory on a Mac at least, where we have data integration 4.4.1 and 5.10, and somewhere around here also there's a symlink folder that points to data integration 4.4.0. And then finally, data sync. If you're a Socrata endpoint user, you can use data sync and install data sync. Data sync is an open source project. By Socrata. DataSync handles a lot of the uploading process when it comes to a Socrata platform. However, again, this is compatible with any other API. DataSync is not compatible with any other API, but our framework is certainly compatible with any other API. And to download, go to the releases, unless you want to compile your own jar. And DataSync 1.5, I have not tested yet. This just came out the other day. So I'm going to go down to DataSync 1.0. DataSync 1.0. And download that jar. Download that jar. You can put this into any directory that you want to put it into, right? So the ETL directory goes where you want it to go. The Kettle directory, put it to where you want to put it. And the DataSync directory, put it to where you want to put it. We're going to configure parameters that are going to point to all those directories down the road, and so you don't have to organize everything so specifically. This is also what allows multiple operating system capability and allows you to work across multiple different environments, because your environment is going to be configured to where these directories are. So we put it in path to DataSync. But the moment that you put it, no matter where you put it, you're going to have to edit your very first file. So I'm in the Open Data ETL directory. This is where I put the GitHub repo that we cloned earlier. This is where I put the GitHub repo we cloned earlier. So as soon as you download DataSync, and there is a folder here you do see that's called DataSync, you can put DataSync in there. You can put DataSync in there. That's completely legitimate. Or again, you can put it anywhere else. But no matter where you put it, you need to check on this file within the DataSync directory called Load Preferences. You see this command here, java-dar datasync.jar, right? Datasync, the way that this command is written right now is checking in the DataSync directory. So if you put the DataSync jar in this directory, you can run it right out of the box. But if you put it anywhere else in your operating system, which you very well may, you just need to adjust this command to go to the directory where it's at. So if you put it under Applications, for instance, or if you put it into a subfolder under Applications, you need to make that adjustment. So point this file to where DataSync is located. This is a bit kludgy because there's one other location where we need to point to DataSync. So we're going to try to collapse that down so you only need to make that modification once. But this is one of the few times that we had to double up on the same step. OK, so that's the basic installation. More or less, download those three things, put them to whatever directory that you want. That's pretty straightforward, and the download bit is what kind of hamstrung us here. So the users are going to need to define two different environmental variables for their Kettle installation. All right, but you only need to do this once. This is one of those, you run it once every single time you set up an environment. So if you set up a Windows development environment, you do it once there. If you set up a Linux production environment, you set it up there as well. And you need to set up two things. You need to tell it where the ETL directory is, and the location of the DataSync installation. And for us to do this, we're going to get to be able to run Kettle for the first time. And the thing I hate about Kettle most is the naming structure is just god-awful. Tahoe is the one that you buy. Kettle is the application that you download. And to run it, you run something called Spoon. It makes no sense. I don't know why. From the beginning, it is one of the weird things. So you run Spoon. And if you're in a Windows environment, you run spoon.bat. If you're in Linux, you run spoon.sh. So go find where you put data integration. If you do have it downloaded, you've been able to follow along where I'm very quickly going through now. go find it and run spoon.bat or spoon.sh. In a Mac environment, I run something like this: sh path to open data utility kit / data integration / spoon. Now notice I put data integration here, right? Because I have data integration just pointed to whatever my current version of Kettle is. Where is my data integration? Oh, yeah.
I got a screen.
You got a screen? Good. So the Linux Mackie people, we tend to do off terminal. For Windows, you get to more GUI based where you can navigate to and double click on .bat. So I'm in data integration 4.0. You don't run data integration. That's the tricky thing about this. You want to click on that. Resist the urge. So Windows users will run spoon.bat. And you'll get a screen that pops up. It can take a second. And the very first time you run it, it asks you if you want to connect to a remote repository. You're going to get this little box that says you want to connect to a remote repository. Cancel out on that. We're not going to use that in any way, so just cancel out on that. This is the screen that you'll see, right? The getting started screen. All right. For the people who have it, who's at this point actually? All right, we got a couple people. That's great. So the thing that you're going to want to edit next is your Kettle properties. You can do this manually. You can actually go into it, find the text file, and modify that. But we're going to do this through the GUI. So if you have Kettle up, or when you do have Kettle up, you're going to go up to Edit Kettle Properties. These are, again, the properties that are fundamental to the environment that you have itself. And you're going to want to do something like this. You're going to want to insert new values. One called data_sync_directory. And you're going to want to path to where you put your data sync. So if you put, again, if you put it into application/datasync, and your jar is sitting in that directory, then you want to point it there. If you want to point it to your ETL directory, and then you also need to point to your ETL directory, ETL_directory, and path to the directory. And basically, you're going to want to point it to your root, the roots of that file you just downloaded from GitHub, right? So in this case, Open Data ETL Toolkit, right? That's where all of our ETLs are going to live. And from here on out, Kettle is going to reference these variables, these two variables, to figure out almost everything. It's like, oh, you want to run an ETL. OK, all the ETLs are in this directory. And then I need to go out to datasync. All right, and datasync is over in this directory. So this is set up for your environment that you only need to set up once. So if you, again, I'll go back through that. If you go to Edit Kettle Properties, and in this environment is a new, fresh environment. I just set this up last night, where if you control-click or right-click, depending on your operating system, you can insert a couple of rows. So data sync directory, and then you put in where your data sync location is. And you put ETL directory. Oops, didn't want to do that. OK. So you set those two things up. These are the two custom parameters that we need to do. All right, click OK, and now it's saved. And you can go and double check on it, make sure save through as part of the paranoia. and you do that. I use the home directory. Now, I should caution that I'm using a home directory, so if I had multiple people logging in and they go to different homes, then it would break because I use the / shortcut. I would almost recommend always using the full path just to make sure you're pointing to the same location. Okay, so this is a large part of the setup. We configured our environments. Our environment configuration is now done. All right, we only needed to have done that once. That was the one time that we needed to do that. So I just want to point out what's happening here. Open Data ETL kit, utility kit, sorry, I mislabeled that, is the home directory, right? That's where things are living in right now. You can rename this, all right? That's how it's referred to on GitHub. But if you rename it, all you need to do is adjust that Kettle Properties that we just did that pointed to ETL_directory. So you can name that whatever you want. We don't name ours Open Data. That's an ugly name. But we needed something to distinguish it on GitHub. We just name it ETL, right? Because in our file directory, that's what we want. We want to see all the ETLs. Underneath that, we have a few different subdirectories. Again, some typos here. We have an ETL subdirectory. So if you go and take a look at the folder and file structure, we have an ETL directory. The ETL directory is where you're going to want to stick all your ETLs. Your actual custom work is going to go into the ETL directory. This is where you're going to be in most of the time. We have a data sync directory. And data sync can contain a data sync jar. It can contain that, but it doesn't need to. What it really contains is configuration files that are mostly used if you're going to deploy it into a headless Linux machine, a Linux machine where you don't have a GUI, you just have a terminal. Right? It just has some configuration right there. This was actually developed with Socrata and us because we said, hey, we need to deploy this into a headless Linux machine. And they returned some configuration options of being able to do that without a GUI. We have a log directory. Natively, the log directory contains 3 utilities: dataset logs, ETL runtimes, and today's logs. These can be ran in Linux to tell you how long it takes to run your ETLs. So sometimes we say, hey, that took 50 minutes. Does that normally take 50 minutes? We go run this script, and it tells us whether or not this ETL has taken 50 minutes in the past, and it shows us actually good logs. If you really want it, you can also just pipe your logs over to Splunk or Graylog2 to do some of your, if you have some more automated, more sophisticated log management. And then we have tools. And tools contains a KTR, which is really handy. This is a very Socrata-specific thing. But you type in a data set where you're loaded up to, and it tells you the last time it was updated, who updated it last, metadata information that's actually not visible through the public website. It's buried within the JSON. So this is actually a great tool to just check on when the last time a data set has been updated. So the ETL directory itself, it's going to be our main workhorse. And right now, it contains several different files. Many of these are templates, just template files for you to start with so you can do the next bit. Kind of gives you the base outline. And then it contains also utilities. And these utilities are doing the nice things behind the scene that make it easy. So one of the features that comes with this, with the proper configuration, is you can configure email notifications. Right? The moment that a job finishes, it'll go hit an SMTP server. You have to configure which SMTP server you want. And then it tells you whether or not the ETL job succeeded, failed. It'll pass on any error messages. It has a nice subject line, so it's quite clear that such and such process failed. I have an Outlook rule that if it succeeds, it marks it as red, puts it into a folder. If it has failure in the subject line, then it's marked, flagged, and kept in my inbox, so I can see it right in the morning. Most of our ETL jobs run all night. From midnight to 6 a.m., most of our work is being done. Okay, so this documentation gets into various different bits. And then there's also setting up the email itself. And so we're going to open that up. We're down to 5? Yeah. Oh, man. I need 20 more minutes. Then there's the email documentation itself. And so just step through that just very quickly. Let's open up 2 documents. Let's open up from Kettle open up the template directory. I actually have one open. Right? And this is the ETL template. I'll describe the layout, because this will be the most helpful. From get variable on down, all these different steps, you never touch, unless you know what you're doing. You never touch. The table input is very common. You're always going to do this. But you may not do a table input. You can use an RSS input. You can use JSON input, whatever it is. Right? You can replace that process with whatever you want. And in this case, I have a bit of SQL. Sorry, it's a bit small. I'm not sure if I can zoom in on that. What's the accessibility for Mac to zoom in? What's that? Command plus? Thought it was. Nah, it's not working.
I can't remember where it is. The screen.
So you configure your database that you want to connect to. And in this case, I was connected. There's a tutorial that we're actually going to go through, surprisingly. There's the connection that you want to connect to, which is right there. And you run the SQL. And I can run the SQL. So I'm actually going to hit preview here. It's less than 1,000 rows, but I'm actually joining two tables. I'm actually renaming tables on the fly from the non-human readable to human readable. It's just SQL. You can do everything that SQL does. Right? And that's the data. It was good data. To be seen later. So as soon as that data comes out, the whole entire objective, you can do other transformation steps. And that's just where you just need to know Kettle to do. But all you need to do is get it here. Just get it to this step right here. All right? Go through the process. And as soon as it gets to this final output step, this text file output, everything else is taken care of for you. And what is everything else? That's the email notifications. And I'll show you how to configure email here real quickly. That is actually loading that data set. That's piping it over to the logs. Everything gets taken care of for you from that point forward. So you extract, you transform, and then that L and all the other niceties that you want to go alongside, such as notifications, such as handling different operating systems, such as, well, if I deploy this over on a Linux box, or if I go and deploy this ETL on a Windows box, it will work. This step right here takes a look at what operating system you're on to take care of some things. That takes care of through JavaScript. So a lot of it is just get the guy here, load it, pass it through here, and then from here onto here, do what you will. Do what you need to do. That might be custom. Again, this is just, you're going to need no Kettle to do that. But that's where we just want to focus the work on. Configure your environment, configure this. Now there's a couple of things I should touch upon that you need to know, and it is in the documentation. One is settings. There are 3 parameters that you need to point out. 3 parameters for every custom ETL. So all that work that you do in that little step right there, and the extraction, you configure this. One is the control file. I have documentation what the control file is, but it just basically lists in a JSON format all of the API names, all the API names of where you're going to be uploading the data set to. So if you have a column called state, well, do you have a column called state on your data portal or no? Right, so this control file tells you how to do it. And there's a way to generate the control file using the data sync utility, so you don't have to think too much about it again. It's in the documentation. That's all I can say. The 4x4, so Socrata data sets or mini data sets have a unique ID, and so you just plug that in there. All right, so you say this is where the data set is going to go. And the file name, that text file name that you want to call that text file. Right? I said there's a text file output, so you just want to call it. So oftentimes we just simply call it the name of the data set, extract, right? Whatever the name of and then extract, right? And that's the text file name. So those 3 things you configure, and then you hit OK, and then that allows you to run it. So you set up your environmental variables, you create your E and your T, you go and grab the data, and then you create 3 different parameters, variables, for the particular ETL that you're working on. And that's going to carry the weights. That's really going to carry the weight. From this point on, Kettle's configured with relative directories. It knows where its ETL directories are at. It knows what you want to call things. It knows where to send it. And at that point on, it takes care of that work. It takes these variables. It inserts it into emails. So you have email names. And again, all that kind of niceties that you don't want to engineer, it's there, and you can deploy it. I will point out one bit, and I think I'm very much at end here. Yep. To configure your email I'm going to open up under the utilities directory ETL completion email, which is a Kettle job. Why are you not opening? All right, that wasn't opening for some reason. So I'm just going to go back and give an overview because, again, we're about 20 minutes short on time here. So creating and configuring an ETL is pretty straightforward. I show the documentation here where I just pointed out. You just need to really adjust right there. And you need to adjust how you're grabbing your data, which is natural. And you need to configure the 3 ETL parameters. And we start getting into the configuration file. There is some configuration there. And then setting up automation. This is the biggest caveat right now. Right now, it's the biggest caveat, and it's the biggest thing that I have on my GitHub issues. This right now works out of Linux because it relies on bash scripts. I need to get those things over to batch scripts instead of shell scripts. So what you have here is when you set up your automation, you configure one bash script file. You configure one bash script file, and basically you just set up a cron job to run this, and this will take care of everything else that's happening. It'll pipe it over to logs, it'll pipe over everything else. So as soon as you're ready to deploy and go into production, you set up a cron job, run this script, and then everything else gets taken care of. So there's 3 phases of it. Setting up your environment, setting up the ETL yourself, and then configuring one file and a cron job to actually run that into production so you actually have it on a script. If you don't want to use cron jobs, you want to do a different scheduling mechanism, then you don't use cron jobs. But you run this one script, and then things get taken care of. And this contains it. And finally, the thing that you can do is you can use different utilities that we include to figure out when was the last time a data set was updated, what were your log files, what were the outputs, did things fail, did things pass? So we include some utilities, which is that very last section. So again, sorry, we had a bunch of problems getting it set up, so I couldn't deliver end-to-end tutorial on this, but hopefully that gives you a good introduction, points you to the screens that you want to take a look at, and so you can configure this on your own, and hopefully that documentation works. We actually had a tutorial lined up where we were able to actually walk through an example and pull data off and actually load up to Socrata, but
thanks so much, Tom,
Yep.
for doing that under pressure in 20 minutes. And thanks everyone for bearing with us with trying to get the files downloaded. And this is a conversation that we can continue having. And Tom is very gracious in sharing these resources. So continuing this through kind of our peer network and just kind of making sure that this information is disseminated and we can just give the developed conversation.
We might just need to capture that, go through a screen walkthrough and throw it up on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Where I work best.
Yeah. So we can do that in the coming weeks. Definitely. All right. So maybe move it out for questions in the hallway if anyone has them. Thanks so much.
Also, thank you.